Have you ever felt shocked when discovering a truth that is completely different from what you used to believe? This is exactly the feeling many of us experience when we first find out how small Greenland actually is compared to Africa. We've always been misled by the image of a massive Greenland almost as big as an entire continent, thanks to the maps on our classroom walls or the familiar map apps we use every day. That feeling of being deceived isn't without reason. Just imagine a vast area like Africa, with a size of up to 30 million square kilometers, gets shrunk down, while Greenland, which is only 2.1 million square kilometers, gets blown up to an astonishing scale on the Mercator map. To better visualize this comparison, Greenland is actually about 14 times smaller than Africa. It's an absurd size difference, a distortion of geographical reality that we've unconsciously accepted for years. This distortion isn't just a random mistake. It was a deliberate choice made by cartographer Gerardus Mercator in the 16th century. He designed this map primarily to serve the needs of maritime navigation. To help sailors orient themselves and maintain straight courses at sea, the Mercator projection preserved the shapes and angles of regions. But the remarkable thing is that this specialized tool, the Mercator map, eventually became the standard image of the world in our minds. It shaped how we perceive the scale, significance, and position of countries and continents. Think about it: when Greenland looks that big, do we unconsciously assign it more weight and influence than it actually has? Meanwhile, countries near the equator like Congo, Brazil, or Indonesia, despite their vast sizes, are visually minimized, which can lead us to underestimate their importance. Did you know that the largest desert in the world is not the Sahara, but actually Antarctica? Sounds unbelievable, right? We often imagine deserts as dry, scorching lands with endless golden sand and towering dunes. The Sahara is the iconic image of such a desert, a symbol of harshness and heat. However, this fact completely overturns what we usually believe. The key lies in the scientific definition of a desert, which is not based solely on temperature or landscape, but on the average annual precipitation. A region is considered a desert if it receives less than 250 millimeters of rainfall per year, and Antarctica perfectly fits this definition. You might see Antarctica covered in ice and snow with a bone-chilling climate, but this land receives almost no new rain or snowfall. The massive ice sheets we see there have accumulated over millions of years, not from frequent precipitation as we often assume. The extremely cold air in Antarctica holds very little moisture, and the relentless winds make cloud formation and precipitation extremely rare. With its enormous area of about 14 million square kilometers, Antarctica easily surpasses the Sahara, which covers only around 9 million square kilometers, to claim the title of the largest desert on the planet. It is a frozen desert, a type entirely different from the scorching sand dunes, but one that fully meets the scientific criteria of aridity. This fact is not just an interesting piece of geographic trivia, but also a powerful reminder that the natural world is always full of surprises. So, when you think of Turkey, which city comes to mind first? For most of us, the answer is probably Istanbul. With its rich blend of Eastern and Western cultures, iconic domed mosques, the bustling Grand Bazaar, and the Bosphorus Strait dividing Europe and Asia, Istanbul stands out as the most prominent symbol of Turkey. Because it's so famous, many people mistakenly believe that Istanbul is the capital of the country. But the truth is completely different. The official capital of Turkey is Ankara. So why isn't such a vibrant and prominent city like Istanbul the political center? The reason lies in modern history. In 1923, after the fall of the Ottoman Empire and the establishment of the Republic of Turkey under the leadership of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, Ankara was chosen as the new capital. Its more central location in the country made it a strategic and symbolic choice for renewal, modernization, and a break from the imperial past. Even though it's not the capital, Istanbul still plays an extremely important role as Turkey's economic, cultural, and international gateway. But this common misconception reveals something interesting: how fame and global image can sometimes overshadow political and administrative reality. Next, I will take you to a truth that is beyond human imagination: the secrets beneath the icy surface of the Arctic. Do you remember the astonishing realization that Antarctica, a frozen land, is actually the world's largest desert? Well, prepare yourself for an even more baffling truth. the Arctic is not land, but actually ice floating on the ocean. When we think of the Arctic, the image that usually comes to mind is a vast white land covered with eternal snow and ice, home to majestic polar bears and mesmerizing auroras that almost resembles a real continent, right? We often compare it to Antarctica, which has land beneath its thick layer of ice. However, this imaginary similarity hides an important difference between the two poles of the Earth. The truth is, the Arctic is made up of sea ice floating on the Arctic Ocean. Beneath that icy surface is cold, deep ocean water, not solid rock or land. This ice, although sometimes several meters thick, is actually a floating carpet that is constantly shifting and changing with ocean currents and winds. This is in stark contrast to Antarctica, where the landmass of the Antarctic continent lies beneath ice hundreds of meters thick. This floating nature makes the Arctic much more complex and unique than most of us realize. Yet despite its landmass, the Arctic is a hub of life, with unique ecosystems that are directly dependent on sea ice. From algae and plankton that live beneath the ice, to fish, seals, and most notably polar bears, the apex predators that depend on the ice for their prey, the survival of these creatures is inextricably linked to the presence and stability of the ice. The natural world is full of wonders and complex mechanisms that we are still learning to understand. Have you ever been surprised by the difference between popular perception and scientific reality of another place on Earth? To answer the previous question, let's now clarify a famous misunderstanding. Since childhood, many people have heard that the Great Wall of China is the only man-made structure visible to the naked eye from space. It sounds majestic and proud, doesn't it? But the truth is actually quite surprising. Astronauts and space experts have firmly confirmed that the Great Wall cannot be seen with the naked eye from Earth's orbit without the help of special equipment. The reason is that the wall is narrow and has a color similar to its surroundings, making it almost blend in with the natural landscape when viewed from afar. Meanwhile, many modern structures such as highways, airports, or cities at night are much easier to spot due to their large size or light contrast. This misconception originated in the 20th century and has been repeated so many times that it became accepted as truth, even though it has been scientifically debunked. Ranked 6th in today's list of strange facts, Russia and China share a border. And it's not a short one, it's actually one of the longest land borders in the world. Hard to believe, right? When thinking of Russia and China, many people might imagine them as two massive powers separated by other countries or vast expanses of land. The image of a vast Russia stretching across Europe and Asia and a sprawling China in the east often makes us forget that they are, in fact, next-door neighbors sharing a border. The Russia-China border stretches over 4,200 kilometers, a truly staggering figure that goes far beyond most people's assumptions about the geographical relationship between these two nations. To put it into perspective, it's longer than the entire width of the continental United States. Though it's not as famous as other international borders like the US-Canada border or those between European countries, this is an incredibly significant boundary, both geographically and geopolitically. Often referred to as a vital trade route, goods, energy, and raw materials flow from Russia to China, while industrial and consumer products move from China into Russia. This is a critical economic corridor, driving trade and cooperation between the two massive economies, especially in the current geopolitical climate. Russia is one of China's largest energy suppliers, and the cross-border oil and gas pipelines are clear evidence of this relationship. The stability of this border holds strategic importance for the energy security of both nations. Up until now, you might have thought Monaco was the smallest country in the world, but that's not actually true. When we think of tiny nations, we usually imagine a small piece of land, yet still with a somewhat noticeable size. Monaco, with its dazzling casinos, luxurious marinas, and thrilling F1 racetrack, is often the first name that comes to mind when talking about microstates. We know it's small, but what many don't realize is that there's a country even tinier, almost unbelievably so. The truth is, Vatican City covers only about 0.49 square kilometers. How small is that? Imagine a standard golf course or even an average city park. Vatican City is smaller than that. It's literally a tiny dot on the world map, an independent country located entirely within Rome, Italy. Meanwhile, Monaco ranks second with an area of about 2 square kilometers. Although still very small, Monaco is more than 4 times the size of Vatican City. Next time you look at a world map, try spotting the tiny speck that is Vatican City, and remember, behind that minuscule size lies a vast world of faith, art, and history. Are you ready for another surprising fact? Hawaii is not actually close to California, despite what many people might imagine. When looking at world maps, especially the smaller versions on phones or in books, Hawaii often appears as a tiny cluster of islands, seemingly just a short distance off the California coast. It's easy to get the impression that it's a convenient vacation spot, just a quick hop away. However, this visual perception is quite misleading when it comes to the actual distance between the two. In reality, Hawaii is more than 3,900 kilometers away from the California coast. To put that into perspective, it's the equivalent of a non-stop flight of over 5 hours from New York to London, a journey crossing continents, not just hopping across a border. This number is more than just a geographical statistic. It's a reminder of the vastness and immensity of the Pacific Ocean. So next time you hear someone talking about Hawaii, remember it's not exactly next door to California, but rather a precious gem nestled in the heart of the wide and mighty Pacific. Let's continue with another surprising fact, this time about a country that might seem familiar. Australia's land area is nearly the same as that of the United States, yet its population is less than 1/10. When we think of Australia, we often picture a vast continent full of kangaroos and deserts. But few people truly grasp just how massive it is compared to other global powers. Many might not realize that while Australia is only about 5% smaller than the US in terms of area, its population density tells a completely different story, painting a unique geographic and cultural picture. Let's look at the numbers to really see the striking contrast. Both Australia and the United States are massive countries. Australia covers about 7.69 million square kilometers, while the US spans around 9.83 million square kilometers, a relatively small difference. This means you could fit all of Australia within the US without having to squeeze it in. But population is where the real surprise comes. In Australia has only about 26 million people, while the US population has surpassed 330 million. That 26 million is even fewer than the population of some individual US states, like California or Texas. This staggering difference in population density has shaped a version of Australia that few places in the world can compare to. Let's move on to something that seems deeply ingrained in many people's minds, but turns out to be not entirely accurate. Although the Mississippi River is the most famous and frequently mentioned, the Missouri River is actually the longest river in the United States. In our minds, the Mississippi River is a symbol. It's tied to American literature, stories by Mark Twain, steamboat adventures, and the development of the American South. When someone mentions America's Great River, the Mississippi is almost always the name that comes to mind. However, that fame has overshadowed an important geographical fact. There's another river less mentioned, but longer. At approximately 3,767 kilometers, the Missouri River is about 160 kilometers longer than the Mississippi. That difference may not seem dramatic, but it's enough for Missouri to claim the title of the longest river in the US. So why do we often get it wrong? The main reason lies in how we define and name rivers when they merge. The Missouri River is a major tributary of the Mississippi. When the two rivers join near St. Louis, Missouri, the Missouri has already traveled a much greater distance from its source than the Mississippi has. Scientifically, the longest river in a system is determined by following the longest continuous path from the source to the ocean. By that definition, the Missouri-Mississippi River system, with the Missouri as the longest tributary, is not only the longest in the US, but also ranks as the 4th longest river system in the world. To ease you into something lighter after the previous shocks, let's explore a fascinating and somewhat ironic fact. Even though Bolivia lost its coastline to Chile during the War of the Pacific, it still maintains a navy. Sounds a bit absurd, doesn't it? A landlocked country with a navy? When we think of navies, we picture grand warships sailing across vast oceans. But for Bolivia, the concept of a navy carries much deeper symbolic and national meaning than most people realize. In reality, 1879 to 1884, Bolivia lost its coastline to Chile during the War of the Pacific. However, instead of abandoning the idea of a naval force, Bolivia chose to preserve it as a constant reminder of its aspiration to one day regain access to the sea. Bolivia's navy, which consists of a few thousand personnel, primarily operates on large bodies of water such as Lake Titicaca and major inland rivers. Their duties aren't about defending sea borders, but rather include patrolling internal waterways, providing civil support, training, and staying prepared. In this way, Bolivia's navy serves as both a functional force and a symbol of hope, a living testament to a nation's enduring desire to reconnect with the ocean. You've probably already been surprised to learn that Antarctica is technically a desert, and the Arctic is just floating ice. Well then, get ready for another mind-bending geography twist. Africa isn't just burning deserts, it actually gets snow. Yes, it sounds like a late April Fool's joke. When we think of Africa, the first images that usually come to mind are the endless sands of the Sahara, scorching heat, and herds of wildebeest sweating under a blazing sun. Most people would scoff, "Snow in Africa? Yeah, right. Maybe when the Earth spins in reverse." But here's the truth, solid and undeniable. Snow really does fall in parts of Africa. In fact, countries like Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia, even though they're right next to the Sahara Desert, have towering mountain ranges. During winter, the peaks of the Atlas Mountains are frequently blanketed in snow. The sight of ancient Berber villages nestled under snowy slopes often leaves travelers rubbing their eyes in disbelief. Who would have thought that just a few hours from golden sand dunes, you could be staring at snow-covered summits? And perhaps the most iconic example, Mount Kilimanjaro in Tanzania. This is the tallest mountain in Africa, and its Uhuru Peak, reaching nearly 5,900 meters, is permanently capped with snow and ice. Even while standing at its base, sweating in the equatorial heat, all you have to do is look up to see its famous white hat gleaming against the deep blue sky. It's like someone placed a giant freezer right in the middle of an oven. Coming to the last strange fact of the day is about language in Africa. While most African countries use English, French, or Portuguese as official languages, Equatorial Guinea uses Spanish. This sounds quite odd, doesn't it? In the diverse linguistic landscape of Africa, Equatorial Guinea stands out like a low note of Spanish, something quite rare on this continent. This linguistic difference has a very clear and unique reason. Equatorial Guinea was once a colony of Spain. It is the only sub-Saharan African country that has Spanish as its official language. The existence of Spanish in Equatorial Guinea is a vivid testament to how history has shaped the linguistic map of the world and made each country unique in its own way. It reminds us that behind every border and name, there are always fascinating historical stories waiting to be discovered.